Well, hey there. So as I talked about in my last One Book July, my introduction One Book July video, I'm doing something kind of different for One Book July since I already am simplified. I'm already in one book and one pen for the bulk of my planning. And so I wanted to focus on how I got to this place, basically, how I determined what the core to my planning system is, and just what that is kind of going through it. So, for those that don't know, I'm using a Look Term 1917 notebook as a bullet journal. And for me, the core of my planning, if I got rid of all of my other planners and everything else, what I need is a monthly spread and a weekly spread. So, for monthly, I'm currently just using this $1 2-year monthly calendar from the Target Dollar Spot. And this is my forward planning. I have things that come up a lot in advance. I can't go week to week because I'm keeping track of a lot of schedules. I've got my work schedule, I've got my school schedule, I've got all of my personal schedule, going out with friends, doctor's appointments, everything with that. I've got my 2 kids' schedules. I've got their school stuff, their activities, their play dates, their doctor's appointments. I've got to keep track of all of their stuff. And then I've got things for my husband when he has doctor's appointments. Less so for him, but if he's out of town or anything that's going to impact the rest of the family, I've got to keep track of all that. And that's all in addition to the usual birthdays and anniversaries and special events and holidays. So I need to have a place that I can look and have everything spelled out for me. And that's what my monthly spread is. I don't always go super far in advance. This is August. I have some things that I know are going to be going on, but there's not a lot. And then the further we get here, the less stuff is in as far as definite dates, but I have a place to put them when they come up. So that when we get into August and I'm making plans in September and October, I have a place to put them that I know it's not a sticky note. It's not something that's going to get lost in the interceding 2 months. I'm not just sticking it somewhere in here and hoping I remember to look back for it. It's all in a separate thing and it's all put together. So this is all of my future planning. I could not do anything without a monthly spread. And for a long time, all I used was a monthly spread. I used a paper planner since elementary school through grad school until my oldest son was born. And then I didn't go back to paper planning until my youngest son was born. But all I ever used was a monthly planner because that was the core for me. That was what I needed. As my life's gotten busier and as I have more things, being a mom of 2 kids, working part-time and going back for another master's, I have things during the week that I need to keep track of that if I don't write down, won't get done. So that's where the weekly spread became important for me. So my weekly spread's gone through a lot of different versions and a lot of different planning systems, but the crux is to have a space for each day of the week. In recent months, I'm trying to think when I started doing this, at least since the beginning of the year, possibly towards the end of last year, I found a tracker really helpful for me so I don't have to keep putting stuff on each day in my weekly spread, so I can just keep track of it for the week. Also, meal planning, integrating that is really helpful for me. I started doing meal planning in 2014, I want to say, maybe in 2015, but that was one of my New Year's resolutions was meal planning. I think it was 2014, and so having a space to do that. And then the rest is just kind of bonus. But the anatomy of my weekly spread as it stands now, I have appointments separated out. This was an interesting week because my oldest ended up getting sick, and he was sick all week, and so I had to cancel most of the things we were doing, and so it ended up being a pretty light week because of that. Let me maybe see if there's a better week. You're out of town that week, but here. To go back a bit to show a better week. Yeah, all my appointments, and they're things that are, this is summer, so there's not a whole lot going on that we have to do, but I do keep track of when library story time, anything time specific, anything that we need to do at a certain time. Also my tasks, and again, these aren't huge things like save the world and write a big paper. I'm not in school right now, and I keep my work stuff separate just so I don't have to worry about it as far as individual tasks. I can keep them personal and work separate. But things like making bread dough because we're going to have where I'm going to need the bread for one of the dinners to make sure I bake the bread, renewing library books, doing certain kinds of laundry. These are things that if I don't write them down for a certain day, I just won't do them. I'll get busy doing other things, and that's ultimately the reason I went back to paper planning. It's because stuff wasn't getting done, because I wasn't going to type in do laundry, pay bills in my phone, and so it wasn't happening because I wasn't seeing it to remember. So that's why I switched back to paper planning, and that's why the weekly spread is so important to me, because this stuff doesn't belong on a monthly calendar with those tiny little boxes. The weekly spread is where all of it goes. So I could make do with planning with just my monthly and my weekly. If that was the only thing I had, I could function, everything would get done, and it would work. And for a long time, that's all that I did. I had, for the first several years when I went back to paper planning, that's all I had was my monthly and my weekly, and I just worked off my weekly. I used my monthly to inform my weekly, and that was all I needed. But last July, after One Book July, I think it was actually in August that I started doing it, I got one of the daily, the Blue Sky Day Designer collaborations at Target, one of those daily planners, and I really liked having the daily planner, just to be able to keep track of what's going on at what time, and have that visual, as well as things that I wouldn't put in my weekly, like what time I nursed my youngest, what time they napped, anything like that, didn't necessarily go in my weekly spread. And so when I switched over to bullet journaling, I decided to do away with that Day Designer Blue Sky planner I'd been using and just do daily spreads in my bullet journal. And so this is where I keep track of things like the weather. I use this timeline up here to the heart is when my youngest nursed. He didn't take a nap that day, but on days that he does, he's dropping his naps right now. So there are a lot of no naps, but times that he does nap, I mark it just like that. Again, this was a trip week, and so it was kind of different. But I put the weather in there, so I know what to expect. Sometimes things get moved around that were on the weekly spread. Like I may not put on the weekly spread that we definitely need to give the boys a bath, but it may have happened, and so it goes there. I may have not planned to give the boys a haircut, but it went there. Also, things that are on my weekly tasks, like boys' haircuts, was on something that I was going to do that week, but it happened to happen on Wednesday, and so it goes down on Wednesday, even though it wasn't on the weekly spread there. So the daily for me is not something that is required, and a lot of it also is just for looking back. There are times that I make notes like that we hiked a mile that day, and just different things that happened. This was on our trip, so just different things I wanted to keep track of that weren't necessarily tasks or to-dos, but just kind of journaling in a sense, but in one line. And so I enjoy having the daily spread. It's not an essential for me, but it's something that helps. So this is the monthly, the weekly are mandatory, the daily is really nice. That's the core of my planning system. In the next video, I'm going to talk about some of the other things that I find useful for me, like how I keep track of long-term to-dos, and just different things that aren't part of the core that I could do away with them and still function, but that really help and complement my core planning system, such that I want to make sure I always have it in my one book that I do year-round. So thanks so much for watching. I would love to hear what your core planning system looks like. Is it something similar to this? Can you make do with even less? Do you need something more? I'd love to hear about it, because I'm always really interested on the basics that people get down to that they can still function and do everything with. So thanks again for watching. Give it a thumbs up if you liked it. Subscribe to keep seeing more, and I will see you next time. Bye.